My name is Avery Whitmore, and for the longest time, I believed I came from a normal, maybe even happy family. We lived in a quiet lakeside town in Minnesota, one of those places where winter snow stacks higher than your knees, and everyone knows which pie is your favorite at the diner. My father, Thomas, taught high school physics, and my mother, Elaine, worked nights at the county hospital as a nurse. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. I used to be the only child, and for a short, golden slice of time, I thought I was loved the way every child deserves to be. Mom would brush my hair before heading off to her night shift, humming softly, like the world wasn't as heavy as it was. On warm summer evenings, Dad would take me fishing. We'd sit side by side in the old wooden boat, the lake glass still, sharing grape soda and casting lines more for the quiet than the catch. On weekends, we'd sit on the front porch, ice cream melting down our fingers, cicadas buzzing in the background. I thought that was what love looked like, a kind of stillness where you felt safe. But everything changed on a bitter January night, just after I turned 8. I remember being pulled from sleep by the urgent banging on the front door and the white flash of headlights in the driveway. My Aunt Linda rushed in, her coat still dusted with snow, her face pale and serious. "Grab a coat, sweetheart. Just a few things," she whispered, brushing hair from my face. "Your mama's at the hospital. The baby came early." The words felt strange. The baby. I barely remembered my mom being pregnant. Just a few hushed conversations and a hand that lingered longer than usual on her belly. I was too young to really understand what premature meant, or what an emergency C-section was, or why Aunt Linda looked like she might cry. But I understood one thing that night, as I stared through the frosted car window. Nothing would ever be the same again. Her name was Lena. She was born 2 months early, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Her tiny body curled beneath wires and tubes, in a glowing plastic box. I wasn't allowed to touch her. "She can't risk getting sick," Mom said, her voice flat, eyes fixed on the pulsing green line of the heart monitor. When I reached out to touch her hand, Mom gently moved it away, like I was dangerous, like I was something Lena had to be, protected from. And from the moment Lena came home, she became the center of the universe. Our house transformed into a sterile zone. Sanitizer bottles lined every shelf, air purifiers hummed in every room, and the sharp scent of bleach clung to everything. Even my bedroom didn't feel like mine anymore. I'd wake up coughing from the fumes. Every time I sneezed, I was packed off to Grandma's. At first, I thought it was a treat. Grandma's apple pie and a new book always waiting. But slowly, I began to understand. I wasn't being loved. I was being removed. At first, I tried to pretend it didn't hurt. I told myself Lena was just fragile, that things would go back to the way they were once she got stronger. But the weeks turned into months, and every corner of the house whispered a different truth. I didn't belong in my own family anymore. Sanitizer stations appeared like silent guards at every door. A humidifier buzzed outside Lena's room 24/7, and the scent of disinfectant was so strong, I often woke up at night with a sore throat, wondering how a house that once smelled like cinnamon and old books could turn so cold. If I coughed or even sniffled, I'd be sent off to Grandma's again, like a problem that needed quarantining. I used to love those visits. Grandma's home felt like a softer world, one filled with fresh pie crusts and stacks of well-worn novels. But over time, I realized I wasn't being sent there because I was loved. I was being exiled. I was a potential threat to Lena, the precious one, the miracle child who now consumed every ounce of my parents' energy, time, and affection. I remember coming home from school one day, a perfect score on my 3rd grade math test in hand. I was beaming, certain Mom would put it on the fridge like she always used to, but she barely looked up from the humidifier. "That's good, honey," she muttered, turning to Dad. "Did you remember to pick up tissues?" Lena's sounding congested. Again. Dad gave me a half-hearted, "good job," before walking away. No hug, no smile, just silence. I started trying harder. I drew pictures and pinned them on the walls. I read entire books in a single afternoon so I could tell Mom something fascinating, hoping it might spark the version of her I remembered. I entered the school science fair and won first place with a project about static electricity. I stood at the kitchen counter, buzzing with pride, waiting to share it. But it was always the same response. Lena's sleeping. Lena has a mild fever. Lena needs quiet. Avery, please lower your voice. So I did. I started lowering everything. My voice, my presence, my hopes. I learned how to move silently, how to breathe without drawing attention. I retreated to my bedroom and made it my sanctuary. The peppermint oil diffuser I used, one of the few things Lena couldn't tolerate, became a quiet boundary, the scent marking the only space that was mine. In that room, I found my escape. Art history books from the library, antique catalogs, old paintings of faraway places and forgotten times. I started sketching brooches and tiaras, fascinated by their stories. Who wore them? What they meant. My world was shrinking. But inside that shrinking space, something new was growing. A quiet fascination, a hidden voice. But even that wasn't safe for long. One day, I overheard Mom talking to a neighbor. She said it like it was a compliment. Avery's always been so independent. She understands Lena needs more care. No, I didn't understand. I didn't feel noble or selfless. I felt erased. I once had a family, and one day, without warning, it was gone. All I had left was the role they assigned me, the easy one, the quiet one, the one who doesn't need anything. But deep down, I did need something. I just didn't think I was allowed to ask for it anymore. By 8th grade, I had stopped expecting anything from home. No one asked where I went after school, and no one noticed if I stayed late. As long as I kept my voice down and didn't set off Lena's allergies, I could have vanished into the floorboards, and no one would have blinked. So I stopped trying to be seen. But not being seen didn't mean I stopped needing to be valued. That's why I walked into Sugar Pine's bakery one gray afternoon and asked for a job. I was 13, barely, tall enough to see over the front counter, still wearing my backpack when I met Mrs. Lorraine, the owner. She was in her late 60s with flour-dusted sleeves and a face that had seen its fair share of heartbreak, and kept going anyway. She didn't ask why a kid my age was looking for work. She just looked me in the eyes, placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and said, "If you work hard, you deserve a place in this world." I never forgot that moment. I started small, mopping floors, wiping down display cases, filling napkin dispensers. My fingers smelled like lemon cleaner and sugar most days. After school, while my classmates went to soccer practice or home to families that waited with dinner, I headed to Sugar Pines. I'd tie my hair back with a rubber band I kept on my wrist, grab an apron from the back hook, and disappear into the rhythm of work. For the first time, I felt like I mattered. Not because I was convenient or quiet, but because I was useful. At home, it was like I didn't exist. I'd slip in, through the back door, do homework quietly at my little desk, and pretend I hadn't just worked 3 hours straight. No one ever asked where I'd been. No one asked how my day went. And certainly no one asked why I always smelled faintly of yeast and soap. Lena, of course, never worked a day. She didn't have to. She was the star of every conversation, every dinner, every family outing. If she had a school recital, the whole family brought flowers and cameras when I got a perfect score on the SAT. Mom barely looked up from slicing strawberries. "That's nice, sweetie. Lena needs more vitamin C." That was it. Not even a glance. But I didn't stop. I applied to 12 colleges during my breaks, at the bakery, quietly filling out applications with sticky fingers and sore feet. Mrs. Lorraine became my proofreader, my cheerleader, and the one adult in my life who didn't need a blood tie to believe in me. She taught me how to write essays with honesty and grit, how to speak from a place deeper than ambition. I didn't tell anyone at home. I didn't ask for help with the FAFSA. I didn't expect them to care. I searched for every scholarship I could find, merit-based, need-based, first generation. I even scraped together enough change to afford a Greyhound ticket to an interview 2 states over. And then one spring afternoon, while wiping powdered sugar from a countertop, I got the email. I'd been accepted to Northwestern University with a full ride. I stood there frozen, hands trembling, the scent of cookies thick in the air. I couldn't breathe. Mrs. Lorraine came out of the kitchen and hugged me like I was her own granddaughter. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone finally was proud of me. That night, I brought the acceptance letter home. It was creased from my pocket, still faintly dusted with flour. I placed it gently on the kitchen counter, waiting for something. Anything. Mom was peeling carrots while Lena flipped through a glossy ballet catalog, giggling about point shoes from a boutique I didn't even dare step into. I stood there silently until Mom noticed the paper. She read the first line, then exhaled like it was just another flyer from the mailbox. "Congrats," she said, "but let's not tell Lena. She's been really stressed this week." I nodded, folded the letter, slid it into my pocket. Upstairs, in my room that still smelled of peppermint oil and effort, I stared at the letter for a long time. The same one that had made Mrs. Lorraine cry tears of joy. The same one that had taken years of silent struggle to earn. And yet, to my own family, it was background noise to Lena's vitamin levels and sleep cycles. 2 weeks later, they threw a small party. Balloons, cake, even a printed banner that said, "So proud of you, Lena." She'd won 2nd place in a school art contest. The drawing was taped proudly in the living room. A pink cat on a rainbow, childlike and sweet. Right underneath it, Dad had hung a plaque. The family's talent. I stood there, looking at it, then back at my own acceptance letter. Now, tucked away in a drawer beneath scholarship forms and recommendation letters that no one had read. That was the moment I stopped asking to be noticed. Because I realized I could move mountains and still be invisible in a house built on selective love. But what they couldn't see didn't mean it didn't exist. I chose art history as my major, not just because I loved it, but because I was tired of letting other people decide what was practical or realistic. I wanted to learn about the past, not through the lens of textbooks, but through what people left behind. Rings, portraits, heirlooms. I remembered the afternoons, at Grandma's, digging through boxes of costume jewelry she claimed were worthless. I didn't know their monetary value then, but I knew how they made me feel. One piece stayed with me, a delicate hairpin shaped like a swan, with pale lavender stones that caught the light just right. I used to hold it by the window, tilting it back and forth, wondering who wore it first and what their life was like. Now I understood. My fascination wasn't just curiosity, it was instinct. The beginning of a calling. At Northwestern, I finally breathed. I listened to lectures about European dynasties and jewelry symbolism from centuries past. I lost myself in archives, wrote essays that felt more like personal letters to the forgotten. Women in old portraits. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just becoming myself. After graduation, I landed an unpaid internship at a small jewelry appraisal firm in Chicago. It wasn't glamorous. I wore white gloves and handled dusty pieces no one cared about. Most of them had no name, no provenance, no story. But I was patient, because for the first time, I wasn't waiting for my parents to see me. I was learning how to see myself, and every hidden gem clearly. The internship paid nothing. I survived on instant noodles and weak coffee, lived in a 4th-floor walk-up with uneven floorboards and windows that rattled in the wind. Some nights, I questioned everything, whether I'd chosen the right path, whether this quiet pursuit of forgotten jewelry even mattered. But deep down, I knew I wasn't chasing money or prestige. I was chasing truth, the kind that sits inside a brooch no one's looked at twice. That truth found me one rainy afternoon. A box arrived at the office filled with costume jewelry from a local estate sale. The kind of stuff that usually ended up in dollar bins. Among the tangled chains and chipped enamel lay a small brooch, simple in shape, but something about it caught my breath. The detailing was wrong. Or rather, too right. The engraving on the edges, the flawless enamel, the weight, it didn't match its label. I turned it over. A nearly invisible maker's mark, almost rubbed out by time, blinked up at me. I couldn't explain it, but something in me clicked. That night, I stayed late. I combed through old archives, design references, museum databases, pulling thread after thread until a name emerged. Jules Marais, a French artisan who had once designed jewelry for minor nobility before his studio was destroyed in World War II. The mark on the brooch was his. It was real, it was rare, and it was buried in a pile of junk until I saw it for what it was. I compiled every bit of research I could find. Historical records, signature comparisons. I even reached out to a friend working at the university's library archives to double-check a museum ledger from 1937. When I presented my findings at our Monday meeting, I wasn't boastful. I just spoke from the place where passion and certainty meet. The brooch was reappraised with a starting value of $12,000. At auction in Seattle, it sold for over $40,000. My name appeared in the company-wide email for the first time. Avery Whitmore has a sharp eye. It was just one sentence, but I stared at it like it was a billboard. I didn't cry. I didn't jump. I just sat still and let the moment land. It wasn't the praise that moved me. It was the recognition. Someone finally saw what I saw. After that, more pieces started accidentally ending up on my desk. A cloisonné enamel necklace tossed aside as a reproduction. It turned out to be an original by a 19th century Russian artist. A plain platinum wedding band. Actually, one of 30 custom-made rings commissioned by a historic Boston family. I never rushed. I never skipped steps. I treated every forgotten piece like it had potential. Because it did. Even I did. One day, my supervisor, Margaret, took me out to lunch for the first time. Over lemon tarts and iced tea, she tilted her head and said, "Avery, have you ever thought about going solo?" I laughed. "Me? I live off vending machine snacks." She smiled, not joking at all. Exactly. The hungriest people always find the rarest meals. That night, I sat in my dim apartment and stared at the notebook Grandma Marie had left me, the one filled with her scribbled recipes, gemstone names, and quotes she loved. On the first page, in her shaky handwriting, it read, "It's not the rare item, it's the girl who sees it as treasure." That was when I knew. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was becoming the kind of person who could spot the value others missed, including in myself. The idea started as a whisper, an itch I couldn't ignore. I didn't have capital. I didn't have connections. But I had skill, instinct, and a growing list of collectors and antique dealers who preferred my meticulous eye to the bloated bureaucracy of larger firms. I started small, verification gigs for pawn shops, family-owned antique stores, estate lawyers with dusty boxes of heirlooms they didn't understand. I charged less, but I missed nothing. Each evening, I'd sit in my cramped apartment, cross-legged on the floor, sorting velvet pouches and photographing gemstones against wrinkled linen. I studied historical hallmarks the way some people memorize scripture. I learned how light bends inside a sapphire, how an 1800s ring clasp closes with a sound unlike any modern one. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. something bigger, was finally taking shape. In the fall of my 27th year, I signed the lease for a 300-square-foot office in an aging brick building above a shuttered dental clinic and next to a hole-in-the-wall Italian cafe in downtown Milwaukee. The space smelled like dust and old paint. The floors creaked. My desk was a salvaged wooden table propped up with a file box. My chair was from the curb. I scrubbed it down with vinegar and wore gloves the first time I sat in it. But it was mine. I named my company Aurum and Iris. Aurum for gold. Iris for the flower my mother once grew in our front yard, before Lena was born, and everything went quiet. It felt like a tribute to what could have been, and a declaration of what I was becoming. The beginning was brutal. I made cold, calls to antique shops, sent out handwritten letters to private collectors. I barely scraped together rent. Some nights, I heated canned soup on a plug-in kettle and worked by lamplight. But I never cut corners. Every appraisal came with a binder of provenance research, gemstone analysis, and handwritten notes. Then the referrals started. One became two. Then came a call from a probate lawyer managing a high-profile estate. Then a regional museum reached out. They'd heard I could evaluate a 19th century pendant with no clear origin. My work spoke louder than I ever had to. And word travels fast in a niche world where accuracy is currency. In my second year, I moved to a ground floor office with a real sign on the window. I hired my first employee, Maya, a geology grad with steady hands and bright eyes. I taught her everything: how to trust her gut, how to spot handcrafting without magnification, how to find a story in silence. By year 5, Aurum and Iris operated in 3 cities: Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and Denver. We authenticated forgotten collections found in attic safes and safety deposit boxes. We worked with auction houses on million-dollar assets. My net worth quietly surpassed $12 million. And yet, I still drove a silver SUV with a dent in the side, and used a phone 2 models old, not because I was frugal, because I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, especially not to my family, who to this day still thought I worked some vintage job and lived off instant coffee and luck. At Sunday dinners, Mom still talked about Lena's 4th major, animal behavior psychology now, and asked if I'd considered applying to the local high school for a job with real benefits. Dad nodded. Lena showed off a new designer purse, claiming it was on clearance. And I just smiled, knowing full well that the pearl necklace I wore once belonged to a duchess from the Edwardian era. They didn't see it, and for once, I didn't need them to. I hadn't planned to host Thanksgiving that year. In fact, I was planning on skipping it entirely, maybe renting a cabin somewhere, spending the day with a pot of tea, a stack of books, and my silence. But then Mom called. Her voice was thin, unsteady. "I haven't been feeling well, Avery. No one's really up for cooking this year. Everyone's looking forward to the holiday. You know how it is." I knew what she meant. They expected a meal. They expected me. So I said, "I'll handle it." And I did. Just not the way they thought. I hired the same catering service I used for my company's private auction events. Elegant, discreet, and impossibly professional. They specialized in curated meals for high-end collectors, plating, dishes like paintings, designing every detail from floral arrangements to place cards. I paid for everything with my company's secondary card. No one asked. No one knew. On Thanksgiving morning, I arrived early. The catering team followed an hour later, wheeling in silver trays and setting up portable ovens in my parents' kitchen like it was a 5-star restaurant. Lena saw them first. She leaned in and whispered to Mom, "Isn't she going a little overboard? Looks like she's trying to impress someone." I heard it, and I smiled. Not because she was wrong, but because I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I just wanted one real meal. One moment of peace. No dry turkey, no instant gravy, No forced laughter over lukewarm mashed potatoes. Dinner was served on time. The table glowed under soft candlelight. 20 guests, relatives, neighbors, distant cousins, gasped over every dish, asking who I hired, how I knew these people. I said little, just poured wine and let the food speak for me. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to go upstairs, to my old bedroom, still filled with the scent of peppermint and the quiet weight of old dreams. I opened my laptop to monitor a live auction in Tokyo. A longtime client was bidding on a rare Meiji-era gemstone set. I connected via headset, tracking bids, adjusting valuations in real time. That's when Lena burst in. "Do you have an iPhone? Charger?" she asked, eyes already scanning my glowing laptop screen. She froze. Her gaze narrowed. "What is this?" Before I could stop her, she picked up the laptop and marched downstairs. "Guys, look what Avery's doing on Thanksgiving." She spun the screen toward the guests. Tabs open. A company bank account showing $12.6 million, a pending $400,000 authentication contract. The latest quarterly report, over $4 million in revenue silence, dropped like a bomb. Mom was the first to recover. She laughed nervously, spearing a piece of turkey. "She's probably just helping someone file paperwork. Right, sweetheart?" I stood, slowly straightening my sleeves. My voice was calm, but every syllable landed like stone. "No, Mom. I'm not helping someone. I'm the one signing that contract. I'm the CEO of Orem and Iris. I built it from nothing. We operate 3 offices in 3 states. What you're seeing is mine." A fork clinked. Aunt Linda's mouth fell open. Dad leaned back in his chair, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Lena dropped the laptop. "You have that kind of money? And didn't say anything?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm still in school. Mom and Dad are in debt. For me." I turned to them, eyes steady. "I've been sending you $7,000 every month for over 2 years. You never asked where it came from. You just took it." Mom turned pale. Dad turned red. Lena began to cry. "I deserve to know," she shouted. "I'm your sister. Family is supposed to share." I looked around the room. The same people who once dismissed me, pitied me, called my work cute or just a phase. And I said quietly but clearly, "Family doesn't mean carrying people who refuse to climb while they sit and judge. I gave out of love, not obligation." I closed the laptop, picked up my purse, walked to the door. Behind me, someone shouted, something about duty, someone else about shame. But no one followed. No one stood. No one said, "We're proud of you." And for the first time, I realized I didn't need them to. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't make a scene. I didn't need to. The silence I carried with me said everything. I got in my car, hands shaking, but not from regret. From relief. I had walked out of a room that had asked me to shrink for 27 years. Back in my apartment, my phone began to vibrate, then buzz, then erupt. Calls, messages, notifications from numbers saved and not saved. I let it ring. Then, slowly, I powered it off and placed it face down on the counter like I was laying a heavy stone to rest. The next morning, I turned it back on. Message after message rolled in. First from my mother. "Avery, this isn't how families work. You're making everything worse. Lena's falling apart. Please come over." Then my father. "I don't know who you've become, but this is not how you treat your parents." Then Lena. "You're ruining everything. You'll regret this." But the messages didn't stop there. My company's general inbox began, receiving spam, veiled threats, guilt-tripping pleas, from people I hadn't spoken to in years, uncles, distant cousins. Even Mrs. Henderson, the wife of my father's colleague who once said at a BBQ, "Avery's sweet, even if she's not exactly going places." I didn't reply. Instead, I called my attorney, Marcus, a man I'd worked with on several estate valuation cases. When I handed him my phone and showed him the digital pile of guilt and manipulation, he didn't blink. "You need a clean break," he said. "Legally, financially, emotionally." He drafted cease and desist letters that afternoon. I requested one line to be added at the end of each notice, not in legalese, but in plain human language. Love, if it exists, should never come with an invoice. A week later, Lena responded the only way she knew how, publicly. She posted a carousel of old photos to Instagram, me holding her as a baby, me at her high school graduation, me smiling next to her at her 17th birthday dinner. The caption was vague and theatrical. "Not everyone with money has a heart." The comment section split. Half called me heartless. The other half asked why someone working on an MBA was using decade-old photos to paint herself as a victim. Didn't respond. Instead, I opened the small wooden box in my closet and took out the necklace Grandma Marie gave me when I was 15. A single pearl dangling from faded gold. I clasped it around my neck, not because it matched my outfit, but because it reminded me of who I was before they erased me. Then I called the one person I hadn't blocked, Grandma Marie. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. She wasn't surprised. "You finally did what you should have done a long time ago," she said. "I stayed silent for too long," I admitted. "You were surviving. But baby, family isn't who pulls you back when you're trying to fly. You've lived in their shadow long enough. It's time to step into your own light." That week, I invited her to stay with me. She arrived with a small suitcase and a tin of butter cookies. We sat in the living room, going through a gemstone collection I'd acquired from Switzerland. She picked up a brooch with steady hands, smiled and said, "You know who you are now, don't you?" I nodded, because for the first time, I truly did. I changed everything, all personal numbers, deleted, every address connected to me or my business, scrubbed from company files. My assistant was instructed not to admit anyone claiming to be family without a formal appointment. Not that any of them ever called to make one. The calls stopped. The chaos faded. And then came the quiet. Not the heavy silence I grew up with. The one filled with unmet expectations and unspoken resentment. But a peaceful stillness, like a room finally cleared of dust. Marcus called me one Monday morning as I was sipping coffee and reviewing an exhibit layout. "Looks like things have gone quiet," he said, "at least on paper." I smiled, because I knew it wasn't acceptance. It was reluctant surrender. But that was enough. I no longer needed permission to be myself. That month, I signed the lease on a new headquarters in a secure building on the outskirts of Madison, Wisconsin. A mid-century modern villa overlooking Lake Mendota. Private, guarded, clean. The property included a climate-controlled vault designed like a miniature bank, my archive for rare jewelry, client heirlooms, and historical pieces awaiting authentication. Every inch of it was built by me. Every decision, mine. I set up my office by hand, a warm amber lamp, a worn leather chair, and a vintage mahogany bookshelf I rescued from a closing bookstore. The scent of old pages lingered in the air, reminding me of childhood afternoons spent reading Nancy Drew in Grandma Marie's attic, back when imagination was the only place I could fully exist. But now, I wasn't hiding. I was home. Surprisingly, business boomed after the Thanksgiving incident. Some of my former clients, those who had once worked with me under NDA, reached out again, quietly offering referrals. They didn't ask questions about the viral post Lena had made. If anything, they respected me more. I had stayed discreet, for years, and that trust mattered more than any public apology ever could. One call came from a renowned fashion designer preparing a vintage jewelry exhibition in New York. Another, from a European museum restoring a lost 18th century treasure. My company signed partnership contracts with 3 international auction houses within 6 months. I hired 2 new gemologists. Our Denver office doubled in size. During a quarterly strategy meeting, my CFO looked at me and said, "We're in a position to acquire a competitor in the South. If you're ready." I paused. I'd never wanted power. Not in the conventional sense. What I wanted, what I fought for, was freedom. To be seen, to be safe, to build something that didn't need to beg for validation. And I had done that. One early morning, I stood by my second-story window, holding a cup of black tea. Grandma Marie was outside, watering the irises. She had stayed longer than planned, and I hadn't asked her to leave. Watching her in her sky-blue cardigan, still humming softly as she trimmed the leaves, I felt something I hadn't in decades. Complete. That evening, as we sorted loose gemstones in the living room, she turned to me and said, "Do you know what I'm proudest of?" I thought she'd say my success, the millions, the offices, the accolades, but instead she said quietly, "That you stayed true to your values, even when it hurt." That line stayed with me. For years, I'd bent myself into silence, hoping someone would notice the shape of my pain. Now, I didn't need recognition. I'd earned the respect of the one person who never asked me to be smaller. I had chosen my light, and I would never dim it again. While preparing inventory for an upcoming restoration project, I found it again, tucked neatly between layers of soft linen, exactly where I had placed it years ago. The swan-shaped hairpin with pale lavender stones, the same one I used to stare at through Grandma Marie's window, watching the light dance through it like magic. I hadn't forgotten about it. I had just let it rest. Until now. I held it up to the light, and in that quiet moment, I remembered everything. Not just what was taken from me, but what I'd reclaimed. This tiny piece of jewelry wasn't just sentimental. It was the beginning. My beginning. So I wrapped it in blue velvet, placed it in a glass box, and wrote a small handwritten card. For the girl who once felt invisible, you became the kind of light no one saw coming. It now sits on the first shelf of my private gallery, framed by soft museum lighting. Not for public viewing, not for praise, just for me. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived. An international conference on heritage and appraisal in Paris. They wanted me to speak. No NDA, no secrecy. My name, my story, my company. I didn't hesitate. I booked the flight, chose the dress, and packed the white gold ring Grandma gave me. For the first time, I wasn't worried about making anyone feel small just because I decided to stand tall. The auditorium was grand, but I wasn't nervous. I walked onto that stage with quiet pride and the presence of someone who had built every brick of her world without a blueprint. I spoke about legacy, about forgotten objects, and about the value we miss when we only look at what glitters. And when I looked into the audience, I didn't see critics or family ghosts. I saw people listening. Afterward, a young woman approached me in tears. "I used to think I was the problem," she said. "That maybe I didn't try hard enough to be loved." I placed a hand on her shoulder. Trying harder to be loved by the wrong people is like polishing glass and hoping it becomes a diamond. You're already valuable. You just need to stop waiting for someone else to see it first. When I returned home, Grandma was waiting on the porch, a blanket over her knees and a smile in her eyes. "How was Paris?" she asked. I handed her a small bag. Inside was a delicate sapphire brooch from the 1800s. She gasped. It's stunning." "It reminded me of you," I said softly. "Quiet, strong, one of a kind. I've stopped attending Sunday dinners. They still happen. Lena is now dabbling in interior design, again. Mom and Dad occasionally email with updates or vague apologies that sound more like excuses. But I don't reply. I don't need to explain who I am to people who once decided I wasn't enough. Instead, I've focused on mentoring young women entering the field. I fund scholarships for first-generation students who want to study art history, jewelry design, or restoration. I donate quietly. I speak boldly. And I walk gently in rooms I once thought were too bright for me. Because I've learned. A true gem doesn't sparkle the loudest. It just doesn't let itself get buried again. And neither will